All right, it's time for our favorite podcast, Cut to the Chase. And I know everybody is looking for information, the latest, what's going on with Camp Lejeune. We're going to cut to the chase with Marcus Susen. Rising star in the mass tort world, famed e-sure attorney, the pregnancy device. Every time I go to one of these conferences and I listen to one of this, it's always Marcus is on the panel. So I figured if he's on the panel, he can get on this show. How are you doing today, Marcus?
I'm here for you, Greg. I'm great. How are you?
All right, I'm excellent. Thank you for asking. So I know you actually went to Camp Lejeune recently. What was that? Tell me about that little trip.
Yeah, so we one of the first things we did is we went up to Camp Lejeune before anything, right when we got involved in the litigation. And it was a very eye-opening experience because what we've come to find out, which was, I guess, kind of obvious at first, but it didn't really hit me and really hit home, is that Camp Lejeune is a self-sustaining city. You know, I always had it pictured in my head as a military base that was kind of, just that. But it's a self-sustaining facility with shopping malls, fast food chains, parks, golf courses.
Wow.
The sheer size of it amazed me.
Yeah, sounds, I'm surprised to hear that. Now, a lot of people that are listening to the show have lawyers, and I want you to ask your lawyer, in your particular case, did your lawyer actually visit the site in question, or did they send an investigator or whatever? Marcus here is handling a lot of these cases, and he actually went to the site. And basically, from what I understand, is for about 4 decades, the government and some dry cleaners or whatever associated with the base were dumping solvents into the how did it get into the water? Like, what was the actual mechanics of this water contamination?
Yeah, so I think there's several different sources of the contamination, but primarily, actually, when we went up there, we saw the dumping grounds where the disposal methods of the chemicals that they were dumping were just not up to par, not up to code at all. So that helped contaminate the groundwater, and we actually saw the distribution lines of how the water went around the city. We saw the treatment facilities, etc. But there was a lot of chemicals in there, and no one's denying the fact that the TCE, PCE, benzene, all those contaminants were in that water during that time period.
All right. So the government has decided to sort of acknowledge the issue, the problems that they caused, and pass legislation and actually ponied up some money, along with another major, problem with the burn pits. What just, I know this is not really Camp Lejeune, related, but what were the burn pits? Because I know the money is sort of in the same pot. The money is going to go to both, groups of victims.
Yeah, so the PACT Act was passed, thanks really to a ground roots campaign led by civilians that were on the base and ex-Navy members that were affected. And I think they're owed a lot of credits. I don't know if you saw the movie Semper Fi, but that kind of spells out the movement that went on in order to get this bill passed. And the PACT Act, essentially, like you said, it covers not only just Camp Lejeune, but some VA issues that they have with burn pits overseas, where a lot of these veterans are getting sick from the burn pits. What they do is they basically, essentially, one way to get rid of their garbage and disposals, put everything in a pit and burn it. And they're getting sick from it. So the Lejeune and the burn pits, they're kind of commingled into one act. And there's billions of dollars that were allocated for both.
Okay. And so I know a lot of people were, unfortunately were victimized either at the burn pits or at Camp Lejeune, and they're seeing all these ads, come pick up your money, and they're getting text messages, click here to claim money. And there's a lot of misinformation about, the status of the litigation. It's not like the government is thrown in the towel, hey, we're going to pay everybody that claims that they were injured there. It's not your traditional type of litigation. It sounds like it's going to be more like the 9/11 fund or something like that, but we haven't gotten to that point. But from what I understand, how many people over the 4 decades were at Camp Lejeune? Do we have any idea what the actual population was?
The VA estimates that there's probably been about 1 million people affected, during the 50s through the 80s during that time period. And, I wouldn't be surprised if that number or close to that number holds true with the amount of claims that ultimately end up getting filed. Right now, there's about 60,000 claims with the Department of Navy, which is essentially the pre-suit kind of step before you go and file a lawsuit. And more lawsuits are being filed. But I think everyone right now is kind of just waiting to see how the Navy is going to react, whether they're going to get this computer database system up and running by this summer, and whether they're going to start resolving some cases so they don't have to file. But as of right now, just to clarify, 0 cases have been resolved or settled by the Navy. So no one's gotten paid as of today.
All right, so essentially what's required is that the people that were at Camp Lejeune that, feel like they were affected and that they were there long enough have to file, not a lawsuit right now, but the claim. And then the government has a certain amount of time to negotiate the claim, which is how long? 6 months?
6 months, yep.
All right, so out of the 60,000 claims that have been filed, do you have any idea how many have gone through the whole 6-month period of time?
There's been a lot of them. There's been a lot of them that went through. I don't know the exact number, but unfortunately, like I said, I don't think the Navy was really ready for 60,000 claims to evaluate. And that 6-month period historically is there so that the government can evaluate the claims. And I just don't think that's happening right now, because I think they're just trying to build up a system in order to be able to evaluate all the claims. So I don't think they're actually going through and evaluating any claims right now during that 6-month period. They're just trying to get the infrastructure up and running so that they will be able to do so. And I'm hoping that they get that done this summer. And then we can really get the ball rolling, because look, a lot of these people are, to be frank with you, they're dying, right? A lot of people are dying right now. And one thing the court mentioned at its last hearing was, one, that when Congress passed this bipartisan bill, they fully expected for a significant number of these cases to get resolved pre-suit. And number two, a lot of these people would probably you would think that they would take $1 today as opposed to $10 years from now if they are in, that dire situation.
Yeah. And all right, so apparently from what I hear, some of the congressmen, senators, representatives are unhappy that there's really been no movement towards settling. Nobody that went through the administrative claims process actually even got offered $1, $10. So what's going on with that?
Yeah, so I think, one of the ways that, people can put pressure on getting their cases resolved, and I think probably the only way, is to contact their congressmen and women. And I think that's what ultimately ended up happening. I think that bipartisan, both Republicans and Democrats, congressmen and women, were contacted by their constituents. And we're basically saying, hey, look, you guys passed this bipartisan bill. We've submitted these claims and we haven't received any offers on presumptive injuries. These are the cases that, the Navy and the federal government essentially admits that there's causation for. So a few Republicans and the Democrat congressmen, they got together. I think Bud and Tillis from North Carolina, and Cartwright, who's a Democrat, sent a letter to the federal government basically saying, hey, look, we want to know the answer to a few of these questions, like how many cases have you resolved? How many cases were filed? How many people died during that 6-month period or 9-month period now that you've had these claims? So look, I get it. It's an enormous, they probably weren't, the Navy wasn't expecting to get inundated, and they probably weren't built up for it. So I get it's going to take some time. I'm just hoping that time comes a lot sooner rather than later.
All right, and so there is a particular time frame if you were victimized at Camp Lejeune that you have to file your claim. And when is the drop dead date?
It's 2 years. They basically gave everyone 2 years from the signage of the bill. So, roughly about 9 months have already passed. So we're
All right.
probably looking at a little over a year now.
A little over the year, because when you tell me that the VA projects 1 million people were there and suffered injuries, and only 60,000 claims have been filed. I mean, it sounds like there's over 900,000 potential claimants out there that either have not heard about this or are hesitant, or I don't know. I mean, is
I
there
think a lot, yeah, I think a lot of people are waiting. I think a lot of attorneys have the cases, and I think there's a lot more than 60,000 that have signed up with attorneys. I think that what is happening with probably with most law firms is they're waiting for the Navy to build up that system to then batch file or batch serve them with the notices.
Yeah.
That would be my guess. It's purely speculation, but
Yeah. All right, but
from
you're
what I hear talking to people, yes.
yeah, you're not in the know. I mean, I'm not going to say you're in the know, but you're talking to other people that are actively involved in this camp, even the people that were helpful in getting the legislation passed. So, all right, it sounds like what you're telling me is the main holdup is the Department of Navy needs to set up an infrastructure to help them process and evaluate all these claims.
And they're working on it, and they are working on it. Yep.
All right, so that sounds promising. And the other thing that I continue to hear about is it's this litigation or this legislation is going to be handled like the 9/11 fund. What does that mean? What was the 9/11 fund? I mean, I know what 9/11 is, but like, do you have any idea how that fund worked out?
Yeah, so I think that's a lot of hearsay that it's going to be like that. I'll tell you that at the hearing, the judge in the court did mention the Hellerstein model as a basis. Doesn't mean it's going to be exactly the same, because I think there's some things that could be done better, and we can certainly learn for it. But I think that the judge mentioning it is a good building block. It's a good foundation to work from. If we all get together from both sides of the V, the plaintiffs, the federal government, everyone gets together from the get-go, shares all the information, shares all the data, works together to build that system. I think that using the Hellerstein, the quote unquote Hellerstein model, may help resolve some of the cases. And the 9/11 fund, just for those that haven't heard of it, was essentially a litigation against the federal government due to first responders that were injured. I mean, that's the best way to summarize it. And during that litigation, which took some time, the sides, the court, the Judge Hellerstein appointed a few masters. They got together and they built this core discovery base, which was essentially or initially built for discovery purposes, to facilitate discovery. But what ended up happening was once they started building it and inputting the data, they realized that this discovery database was really a settlement database. And so it really ended up pushing settlement through utilizing that database. So hopefully, that's something we can do here, but I think, hopefully we could do it even better.
Good. Sounds good. So like when you say discovery, it's kind of like a legal phrase for like obtaining information. But in this context, it almost sounds like a verification process where you're just showing that you actually are a lot, were there, that you're injured, and whatever else is needed to verify the claim.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, it's the data and the data points that everyone needs to have in order to resolve, any litigation. And normally, as you know, Greg, from single event cases all the way up to mass tort cases, it's sad, but we spend years fighting over these little discovery battles of what to give up, what not to give up, when in reality, we all know the data which each side wants and needs in order to get the cases resolved. So I'm hoping that even though this is an adversarial process, because we file lawsuits, in reality, you have the Department of Navy evaluating fellow Navy members' claims. So I'm hoping that with the bipartisan nature of this all, it can be less of an adversarial process so we can get these people money.
Yeah, I mean, it
you know,
almost sounds like, dare I say it, you're hoping that all the parties can cut to the chase.
That's a good way to put it.
All right, so now
That's a great way to put it.
you mentioned earlier before we got on, before we started to record, that there was a court order. What was that all about?
Yeah, so the court order stemmed from the court's status conference that happened last month, and it essentially has a few points it raised. Some of the good things that they got right on is they created a master docket, which kind of allows all filings to be in one docket, which is great. They also requested applications for leadership, which I think is extremely important to get done as soon as possible. Leadership will allow essentially a mouthpiece on behalf of all the plaintiffs and claimants for the common issues. And I think that'll really get the ball rolling as far as resolution goes, because right now the Department of Navy and the Department of Justice, they really don't have anyone to go talk to as far as representing kind of the common issues. So I think once the leadership gets appointed, that will definitely help. And then the other things that the court brought up are certain things that they want to consider, like coordinating discovery, which we talked about, the discovery database, and maybe the possibility of having a master complaint as well. That would also help. So those are the big issues that came up.
Gotcha. All right. So is there any other update that you would like everybody to know about with respect to the Camp Lejeune litigation?
I would just say that, you know, the Navy is working, and, you know, from my communications with the Navy, they're working tirelessly to get this program up. And I'm hoping that that comes to fruition. And I hope it comes, that computer database is set up this summer. I hope leadership is appointed relatively quickly. We can all get together in one room and really start resolving these cases, because again, there's been 0 settlement offers to date, and a lot of these people are dying or need the money to care for themselves or their family members. So I'm really, really hoping that this litigation is going to be like no other in the mass tort space. It's not a mass tort. And I'm hoping that, you know, we can expedite this for the benefit of these veterans.
All right. I think everybody's sort of on the same page, you know, which is rare these days. But that'll do it for this episode of Cut to the Chase. I'm going to put the letter that you referenced that was sent by the congressman. I'm going to put Marcus's link, because if you or a loved one were at Camp Lejeune and are, you know, severely injured, cancers, botched pregnancies, anything, this is the guy you want to call. All right. You know, I mean, maybe you've had experience with other lawyers, big crash. They never went to the accident. They didn't look around. They didn't take a look themselves. This guy has. This guy knows Camp Lejeune and has seen how it happened. Okay. And that's the kind of lawyer you want. So, Marcus, thank you for coming on to this episode. And we'll circle back in 3 months. You'll give us another update. All right.
Anytime. Enjoy your summer.
All right. I will. Thank you there. All right.